levels, and advocacy on college and university campuses, among other things. We at CIJA, together with UJA, have convened this evening's debate as part of our public advocacy agenda to provide opportunities for all residents in the GTA, not just the Jewish community, to participate directly in the civic events and decisions that will determine the future of our communities and our country. At this point in time, it is really hard to think of an event that is more crucial to all of us than the upcoming election of the members of our House of Commons and ultimately the composition of our federal government. The presence of all of you here today, this evening, certainly reinforces that notion. We meet together this evening in the early days of the Jewish year 5776 on the Jewish calendar. And we are in the intermediate days of the Jewish festival of Sukkot, Tabernacles, or the Feast of Booths. Like its sister festival of Passover, which generally gets more airtime than Sukkot, the festival of Sukkot celebrates the liberation of our enslaved forebears in the Pharaoh's Egypt and their transition to a sovereign and free people in their own land, the land of Israel. While Passover celebrates the moment of our liberation as a people, Sukkot, on the other hand, commemorates our journey and transition from slaves to a free, self-governing people. We commemorate that journey by sitting in the Sukkot, the booths that sheltered our forebears, we are told, physically and spiritually, on their 40-year journey in the desert from servitude in Egypt to independence and freedom in the land of Israel. However, interestingly, the rabbis of the Talmud were never able to agree on what kind of Sukkot, what kind of booths or protection protected the Israelites in the desert. Were they actual physical Sukkot huts, physical huts, or were they the clouds of glory that divinely protected the liberated Israelites from harm? The subject of that debate has never been resolved in the thousands of years since it was first chronicled in the Talmud. So the way I see it, the Sukkot festival has at least two fundamental and relevant messages to all of us on this occasion. One, that the Jewish tradition cherishes the very freedom that this evening's occasion represents. The right of all human beings to govern themselves in the way that our wonderful Canadian democracy provides, through free elections and free speech, and we can never, ever take that for granted. Secondly, like the sages in the Talmud and all the generations after them, a free people must be able to embrace differences of opinions civilly, even on the most fundamental issues. For the rabbis of the Talmud, the identity of the Sukkah was at least as important as whether we or our government runs a deficit and how large a deficit it is. It was a crucial debate. A debate like this in itself represents the value of civil disagreement, which is at the core of our democracy. And we as Jews embrace that. Sadly, too many people around the globe can only dream of sharing this kind of experience. Whatever our opinions and preferences in our very diverse community are, let us just be thankful that we are here tonight to experience this event. We are honored to have as tonight's moderator Yoni Goldstein, the editor-in-chief of the Canadian Jewish News, where he writes a weekly column, and he's been featured in the National Post, Globe and Mail, Maclean's, Haaretz, the Wall Street Journal, and it was really our honor to have you. And with that, let me ask Yoni to come to the podium and let the debate begin.
Thanks to Burl. Thank you to CIJA and UJA for organizing this evening. And thank you to all of you for coming tonight. It's been a long election campaign, the longest since 1872, and that's been exhilarating. I'm sure exhausting for all the candidates and for voters as well. But the good news about this is that the length of the campaign has given us a chance to really learn more about our local candidates, about the parties that we vote for, and about the party leaders as well. And I want to thank all of you for being here tonight and taking the time out of your busy schedules to hear this debate. Of course, you could be out celebrating the Blue Jays AL East Division title. Yes, we'll save the celebrations for after the debate. And without further ado, let's get started. So, to begin with, let me introduce the people in front of you. Joe Oliver was elected to the House of Commons for the first time in May 2011 as the Conservative Member of Parliament for Eglinton Lawrence. He was appointed Minister of Finance in March 2014, and prior to that, he served as Minister of Natural Resources. Please welcome Joe Oliver. Hal Berman is the NDP candidate in York Centre. Dr. Berman works as a palliative care physician with Mount Sinai Hospital's Temi Latner Centre. Dr. Hal Berman. And Bill Morneau is the federal Liberal candidate in Toronto Centre. Mr. Morneau currently serves on Liberal leader Justin Trudeau's Economic Council of Advisors. Okay, a brief word on how the debate will be constructed and organized tonight, and then we're going to get right into it. Each candidate will begin by offering a 3-minute opening remark. After that, we'll go into a question and answer period. There will be 5 questions. Each of the candidates will have an opportunity to answer the questions, to respond to each other, and then there will be a free-for-all session at the end of the question where they can interact with each other. And we've chosen the placements previously backstage. So I think we're ready to get started. Are you ready to get started? Okay. All right. So let's start with your opening statement, Mr. Oliver.
Thank you very much, Yoani. I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this important CIJA debate. First, I want to say what a privilege and honor it has been for me to have represented the values and interests of the people of Eglinton Lawrence in Parliament for the past 4 years. I'm proud of what our government has accomplished and what I've contributed in my role as Minister of Finance and Minister responsible for the GTA. I believe this election is about 4 things: the economy, security, values, and leadership. And on each of these, there are differences which are stark between our parties. In the context of a fragile global economy and the collapse in commodity prices, we need to protect our economy. And that means keeping taxes low, balancing our budget, creating jobs and growth, and making life more affordable for Canadians from every walk of life. We must stay the course. We cannot afford the risky, high tax and spend schemes that the opposition parties are proposing. They would kill jobs and drive us into massive permanent deficits. The most important obligation of government is to protect its citizens and its sovereignty. We will strengthen our securities agencies, fund our brave men and women in uniform, and stay in the coalition to degrade ISIS. The Liberals and the NDP would shamefully raise the white flag of surrender and withdraw from the mission, leaving our allies behind. Israel, our friend and ally, is on the front line in the battle against international terrorism. We will stand with Israel through fire and water, and we will do that because it reflects the best of Canadian values. You know you can rely on our government. This is the moment for moral clarity and determination. Prime Minister Harper offers that moral clarity, the strength to stand up to international bullies, the experience to represent Canada as a leader on the world stage. He has the knowledge and the determination to protect our $1.9 trillion economy and maintain the course for a balanced budget, low tax plan that will create jobs and spur growth. Elections are about alternatives. We offer a reliable and experienced government that will protect our economy, keep Canadians safe, and advance our interests around the world.
Just a reminder to everybody, please speak into the microphones. Dr. Berman.
Thank you very much. Shalom Aleichem. It is a privilege to stand here and speak to you this evening. I've followed every election in Canada since 1980. Maybe I missed a couple of municipal elections in other provinces. I can't remember anyone in which the future of our country depended so heavily on the outcome. And this is the first one in which Canadians have an opportunity to make a choice for real change, to put Canada back on its course. Tonight I'm here to talk to you about issues that are relevant to Canada's Jewish community. The New Democratic Party of Canada has a very strong shared history with the Jews of Canada. The second Jewish member of parliament ever elected was a CCF member, Abraham Heaps, in 1935. In 1939, when the Liberals and the Conservatives were silent, the CCF was the only party that stood up for the Jews that were trapped on the SS St. Louis, begging the government to accept them and to bring them into Canada instead of sending them back to Europe, where many of them perished. More recently, David Lewis led the party in the 1970s, and his son, Stephen, was the leader of the provincial party and also became an ambassador to the United Nations. David Barrett was the first Jewish premier in Canada. And of course, continuing in this tradition, I am proud to be the NDP candidate in York Centre. Consistent with our proud history in the NDP is our party's relationship and support for the State of Israel. Contrary to what you've been told, every federal party in this election that has a shot at even one seat in Parliament has expressed support for Israel. There is no one party that can claim a monopoly on this position. In fact, the CIJA itself has called Tom Mulcair a friend of Israel, and somebody today told me a great friend of Israel. Tom Mulcair was the first leader in this election, in the first televised debate, to categorically state his and my position that an NDP government will continue to fight for Israel's right to exist in peace and security within and around its borders. Let it be very clear, to paraphrase the popular singer Dido, there will be no white flag upon my door. We've heard this too many times from a government that believes there's only one way. You're either with them or you're with evil people. That's not how it is. So given that we agree that all the parties support Israel, let's take a look closer to home. The last 10 years have seen our international reputation eroded. We've lost over 400,000 well-paying manufacturing jobs, replacing job security with precarious employment. We've seen the Senate scandal, enough said. We've seen a party that campaigns on wedge issues and has practiced the politics of fear and division. We can do better. We have a choice. We can choose a government of inclusiveness. We can choose a compassionate Canada that welcomes children and lifts them out of poverty, lifts seniors out of poverty, and welcomes refugees to our shore, and we can choose the NDP.
Thank you, Dr. Berman.
Well, I want to start by saying happy Sukkot and tell you that I'm honored to be here. I was honored to be asked by CIJA to come here to represent Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party. I thought I'd start by telling you a little bit about myself to provide context for our discussion as we go through tonight. I've had the good fortune of joining a family business back 25 years ago. It was a business with about 200 employees, and we've had the good fortune of building that business from 200 employees to 4,000 employees. We're now the largest human resources firm in Canada. But I've also had the opportunity to volunteer extensively in my community. I was chairman at Covenant House, which is a home for street kids in downtown Toronto, and I was chairman at St. Michael's Hospital, which provides high-quality health care for all the range of people living in downtown Toronto. I was also chair at the C.D. Howe Institute, leading public policy think tank. But I have the suspicion that tonight's debate might hinge on some other issues, Israel in particular. So I wanted to tell you that I'm delighted to be here because I've had some limited exposure to Israel. I first went there back in 1987 after graduate school. And I liked it so much, and I told my wife so often how much I love Jerusalem in particular, that we decided to take our 4 children for vacation there this past March break. And I can tell you that there's no better way to understand the vibrancy of the Israel democracy than to be there in the week before an election, to hear passion on both sides of the debate. I can also tell you there's no better way to understand the extreme security concerns of Israelis than to go up to the top of the Golan Heights to Cafe Anan there at Mount Ben Tal and look down into Syria and see that there are towns that are actually controlled by factions of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. So I do have some context for understanding a little bit about Israel. And that's one of the things that makes me proud to be part of the Liberal Party. We have been and continue to be absolute stalwart allies of Israel. We know that Canada needs to be a partner of Israel, an absolute ally, unequivocally stating our support for Israel as a Jewish state, and we know that we need to be against anti-Semitism in all its forms. That's what we stand for. And I will tell you that we believe that Israel and support for Israel absolutely cannot and should not be a partisan issue in this country. We all on this stage need to be supporters of Israel. It is a strong ally of Canada now, and it will continue to be a strong ally of Canada with the next government, the Liberal government of Canada. Thank you.
Question number 1 deals with domestic security. Domestic terrorism is a growing concern for all Canadians, with recent attacks in Ottawa and Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu, attempted bombings of a Via Rail train in the British Columbia legislature, as well as calls for an attack on the West Edmonton Mall. This terrorist violence is driven by a hateful ideology that endangers all Canadians, but also singles out Jewish communities as a specific target. What specific steps would your party take to counter terrorist activity and ensure Canada's safety and security? Mr. Oliver will go first on this question.
Thank you. Terrorism is a global curse, and Canada is not immune. The vicious terrorist attacks in Quebec and in our Parliament have brought the threat home to all of us. ISIS has murdered, raped, beheaded, tortured untold innocent people. They've sold young girls into slavery. They've destroyed ancient artifacts, the history of civilization. They hate everyone who is not them, especially those who hold dear the fundamental values of freedom, democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. And they have declared war on Canada. Canada will not and must not sit on the sidelines as this global terrorist group attempts to extend its grasp to the entire Middle East and beyond. We will protect Canadians and stand shoulder to shoulder with our allies in defense against this evil. Canada is a proud member of the international coalition to degrade ISIS. And frankly, I have to say it again, it's shameful that the Liberals and the NDP would abandon our allies and withdraw from that mission. They talk about our role in the world. They assert the responsibility to protect R2P. What does all that chatter mean if, when it matters most, we run away from our responsibility as global citizens? When we refuse to confront barbarism that attacks and targets our own people. That's why Erwin Kotler said that the Prime Minister was the adult in the room on terrorism. Their position is outright dangerous and tragically wrong. We are fighting ISIS where it lives, but we're also fighting terrorism here at home. And this year we brought in the new Anti-Terrorism Act. Before this law, if the CRA became aware of terrorist money laundering, they were prohibited from alerting our national security agencies. If an intelligence agency uncovered a terrorist threat, they were powerless to intervene. Or if someone arrived with a bullet wound, the border services couldn't inform the RCMP. This law allows for information sharing between agencies that will help us stop terrorism in its tracks. And civil rights will be protected in the most effective and objective way it can be by judicial oversight. We are determined to keep Canadians safe, and that is the most sacred obligation of any government.
The Conservative Party is offering us a false choice. We can either have our security or we can have our freedoms. And I would like to suggest to you that that's not true. We can actually have both. I actually have read Bill C-51. It wasn't as interesting as the Iran nuclear deal, but put me to sleep a little bit less. But I'll tell you, I've read it, and we will repeal it. It takes away some of our most sacred rights. It takes away our security for privacy, and it basically is turning us into a police state. When the Toronto 18 were arrested, and yes, they were wanting to blow things up, they were very bad, they were arrested without the need for Bill C-51. Giving the government too much unfettered power to restrict the movement of Canadians and to take away their passports is just wrong. To keep Canada safe, we need a strong security apparatus. Absolutely, totally agreed. But we also have to have oversight, and Bill C-51 does not give us oversight. We support CSIS, we do, not ISIS, as the Prime Minister would have you believe. But they work for us, the people of Canada. It's not the other way around. And we will not allow the political rhetoric to be used to cause division between us. And we will not certify imams, like the Conservative Senate report suggested. We will not do that because that's not the way to have true security. To have true security, we have to be respected in the world so that people don't want to hit us. We have to show that we don't take one side so much more than another side that people start to hate us. And we have to show that we respect people no matter where they come from and where they live, and not dismiss them just because they think differently from us. That's the way the NDP will do it.
Well, this is obviously a critically important issue, and I want to start by saying that a future Liberal government would absolutely be focused on domestic security. But I think there's a fact we should start by understanding. If you look at the Canadian accounts and you look at the spending that we spent on the RCMP, on CSIS, on federal prosecutors, and on national defense, you will see that it has declined, not increased. So while we're talking about what we're going to do, while the Conservatives are talking about what we're going to do, we're actually spending less on each one of those line items. Now, that may be because you want to create a short-term surplus that looks good in political terms, but it's not right for protecting Canadian security. We want to take security seriously, and we want to do it by a measured and consistent approach to funding of the agencies that do that for us. With respect to ISIS, I'd like to put one thing on the record unequivocally for you. The Liberal Party remains stalwart in the face of dealing with ISIS in the Middle East. We have not said and will not say that we will retreat from the mission. What we have said is that we don't necessarily agree with how the Conservative Party has decided to progress on this mission. We do not believe that the way that we're there now with flights and with airmen only is the right approach, because we do not see a strategy for success. Our Prime Minister has not laid out for us how we are going to get from here to a positive conclusion. We have not heard that conclusion. And what we hear from every expert on this issue is that success in this mission, in that very complicated part of the world, will require boots on the ground. So what have we said? We've said that we are going to deal with having boots on the ground by respecting the fact that the armies that are already in that part of the world need highly effective training. We've said that we know that Canada has done an excellent job of training people in Afghanistan. It's a core strength of the Canadian military. We are going to commit to being part of the ISIS mission, commit in a way that we can use Canada's core expertise to advance the cause of success in that mission. That's what we're going to do, and it's distinctly different from what the Conservatives are doing, yes, but it's much more important, we think, in the long run, to actually getting to a conclusion that will make sense in that part of the world.
I would very much like to know how this is a freedom that a minister of the Crown can put somebody on a no-fly list, and the remedy for this in Bill C-51 is that you can request from the minister to take you off the list, but if the minister doesn't respond within 6 months, he is considered to have refused the request. And so basically the minister, all they have to do is ignore your request and you stay on a no-fly list with no recourse. How is that a protection of our freedoms?
Well, first of all, we need judicial oversight, and we have judicial oversight. And frankly, your allegation that this is becoming a police state is utterly preposterous, and I don't even think it's worthy of any kind of dignified response.
And yet you're responding to it.
We need to take sides in the war against terrorism, and frankly, by the way, it's false that we're spending less on our intelligence services. We're spending more,
we can look.
and I don't see how you can argue that we're strengthening our mission against ISIS by withdrawing from the air mission. I mean, sure, we can send in social workers, we can do some training, we're doing that. There isn't a conflict between doing that, but we have to have a force behind our commitment. And can you imagine the reaction of our allies if we say, sorry boys, you do the heavy lifting, you take the risks, we're going home?
Well,
To be fair,
let me address three things. First of all, I challenge people in this room to go to the Canadian government accounts and find out whether we are spending more or less on those things that I said. The RCMP, CSIS, federal prosecutors, and national defense. Take a look. You'll find out what I found out. So number one. Number two, it is not a retreat to say that we are going to train militaries on the ground to be successful. So having planes there, it's one alternative. We believe it is not ultimately likely to be a successful outcome from that alone response. With respect to the position put forward by the NDP candidate, we do see that it is critically important to use some elements of Bill C-51, like sharing of information between intelligence agencies. We know that we need to protect Canadian securities. We know that we need to do it at the same time as we protect our civil rights. So our view is that we do need to repeal parts of Bill C-51. We need to put very strong oversight, not judicial oversight, but parliamentary oversight, like our 5 major allies have already decided to do. That's the right way to govern these sort of issues in this country.
And just to be, hang on a second now, just to be clear, our military sorties account for less than 3% of all the coalition sorties. And if we withdraw from those, nobody will notice. But you know who will notice? The civilians that we've dropped bombs on and killed, they will notice. We're better at diplomacy and we're better at peacekeeping, and that's the way we should be. Okay. The reason that we need all the security in Canada is because your government has turned our country into an aggressive country, and before we used to be peacekeepers.
Okay, I'm going to have to stop. I'm going to have to stop
ISIS only
Minister,
understands force.
All right, let's move on to question number 2. And the subject of this question is Iran. Brutal and sustained acts of violence have had an impact on tens of millions in the Middle East, including in Iraq and Syria, as well as Lebanon, Yemen, Egypt, Gaza, and the West Bank. At the center of much of this is the Islamic Republic of Iran, whose Revolutionary Guards and terrorist affiliates are victimizing civilians in the region and around the world, while the regime continues to call for Israel's destruction. Despite this, the P5+1 nations entered into an agreement with Iran that proponents say may bring peace to the region, but critics say is a roadmap for Iran to develop nuclear weapons. What specifically will your party do to influence change in Iran's behavior, prevent the regime from obtaining nuclear weapons, and bring stability to the region? And Dr. Berman will begin.
Thank you very much. So as I mentioned, I read the 159 pages of the deal. Now, I didn't memorize it, obviously, but I did look at it because this is a very important thing. Now, all 3 parties, including the NDP, recognize that Iran's nuclear ambitions pose a threat, not only to Israel, but to the entire region and perhaps to the entire world. There's no doubt about that. And I don't think that anybody is suggesting that we give them the keys and say, okay, go ahead, do what you want. You've now agreed to stop making nuclear weapons. That's not how we do it. When Ronald Reagan entered into a deal with the Soviet Union, his catchphrase was trust but verify. And if you take a look at the deal that was written, the deal stretches over 10 years, some elements over 15 years, and every step of the way, there is a verification process in which all of the countries involved, and Canada, if we choose to participate, all of these countries will be able to verify what is happening. Under supervision, the core of the Arak reactor will be filled with cement and become unusable forever. There are a lot of things in that treaty that actually guarantee that they will not be able to create a bomb. Should we take them at their word? Absolutely not. But if we have the means to check things stepwise, then over the course of 10 years, perhaps with some regime change, if it's possible, I think that this could potentially lead to peace. The alternative is that we continue to subject Iran to sanctions, and that's okay if we're thinking about the leadership, but there are millions of people in Iran who really don't care about Israel. They don't really care about Canada, they just want to live their lives. And it's really not up to us to force them to live without medical supplies, without the ability to travel, without proper food and water, just because we're not willing to take a very slow approach to bringing Iran back into the bringing Iran back into the world community. Yes, we will watch them. If they are a threat to the region, if they are a threat to Israel, we will oppose that. But we can't just say no. We can't just say Iran is going to be evil forever. We can look at the example of Germany. Germany, we know what the Germans did to us in the last century. And yet today, they're the ones bringing refugees from the Middle East, and they're the only country that is welcoming them with open arms. All the other countries, including, sadly, our own, are putting up roadblocks. So people can change and countries can change if we help them.
Well, we can all agree on one thing, I'm sure. Iran is an odious regime. It's a country that persecutes women and minorities. It's a country that supports terrorism, supports Hamas and Hezbollah. It's not a place that we can trust. So we definitely do not believe that we can trust what we can hear from Iran in any deal. We were not, however, at the P5+1 negotiations. This is someone else's deal. And we know that that was a very contentious set of negotiations. I can tell you when I was in Israel in March, there were many people who felt we shouldn't have even entered into the negotiations, while there were others who felt that it was the only path to potentially pushing off nuclear capability. Well, there's a second thing that I know that we can all absolutely agree on. We do not want Iran to have nuclear capability now or in the future. So those are the two things that we can absolutely agree on. But we may not be able to necessarily agree on how we conclude from those two separate things that we do agree on. We have come to the conclusion that we welcome the deal with Iran, but only on the basis of absolute verification that they are going to comply with the terms of the deal. Absolute verification. There's no trusting here. But I will tell you, there is a much more important question here today, because we've listened to the Conservative Party say that they acknowledge this deal. We in the Liberal Party have said that we've come to the conclusion that we should welcome it. It's difficult to do that, but we think it's the right conclusion. But we'd like to hear from Mr. Oliver, the representative of the Conservative Party. Is it yes or is it no? Do you support the deal or not? It's an easy question.
Well, clearly we agree, or at least the three of us here agree on a few things. The Iranian regime is a significant threat to international peace and security. because of its nuclear ambitions, its continued support for terrorism, its blatant disregard for human rights, and its repeated calls for the destruction of Israel. And we understand, at least our party understands, when the former president of Iran calls Israel a one-bomb country and that Israel should be wiped off the map, we're talking about an existential threat to the Jewish state. Our government believes that every diplomatic measure should be taken to ensure that Iran never obtains a nuclear weapon. We acknowledge the efforts of the P5+1. I think that speaks for itself. I think that answers the question. However, we will judge Iran by its actions, not by its words. We suspended diplomatic relations with Iran in 2012. We listed the Iranian Revolutionary Guard as a designated terrorist organization, and we have no intention of lifting that designation anytime soon. To be clear, we're not targeting Iranians, rather a dangerous regime that threatens the entire Middle East. Indeed, we recently announced that we would facilitate the establishment of an Oman embassy in Ottawa, which would permit Iranians to access consular services. But you know, if Iran kills its own people, should we put our diplomats at risk in their country? Remember the Iran hostage crisis. Justin Trudeau wants to establish full diplomatic relations before Iran has done anything to redress its appalling record on human rights. Now, let me talk very briefly in the few minutes I have here about the sanctions regime. In 2010, the Prime Minister announced that Canada was imposing sanctions on Iran. Our sanctions go beyond the UN's. They include an arms embargo, asset freezes, financial prohibitions, export and import restrictions, technical assistance, and so on. But we do make exceptions for food, medicine, and humanitarian supplies. If the Security Council withdraws its Iran sanctions, then Canada would have a legal obligation to withdraw